good evening. Thank you for joining us today, Wednesday, as if you didn't already know, for our 15th virtual Noir at the Bar. If you want to talk about us on social media tonight, it is #VNatB. If you want to enter the prize draw to potentially win a free book, it is vnatb20@gmail.com. We'll come back to the subject heading enter for this week, but you never know what it'll be next week. Tonight, I am delighted to host Andrew Michael Hurley, Fiona Veitch Smith, Gail Williams, Joe Lansdale, Jessica Moor, Russ Thomas, Caroline Mitchell, DC Smith, and Charlotte Levin. Woohoo! As many of you already know, but lots of you possibly don't, because I've seen in the chat tonight that we have some newcomers to our virtual bar, so thank you and welcome. Noir at the Bar was started in Philadelphia by Peter Rozovsky in 2008. It then spread across the US and came to the UK in Glasgow with Jay Stringer and Russell D. McLean. Worked its way across to Newcastle 4 years ago with me. Moved up to Edinburgh with Jackie Collins, and now in your home, thanks to current restrictions. So I'm Vic Watson, thank you very much for coming. If you would like to chat with your fellow audience members or people on the panel, please use our chat button. You are very welcome to do so, but please don't do so when people are reading, because you're really going to want to give this your full attention. You also have a Q&A button along the bottom around here. If you have any questions for any of the authors speaking tonight, please pop a question in there and I will endeavour to ask them for you. The music tonight is from The Hold Steady. It was quite bluesy, I enjoyed it a lot. But for now, let's just get on. Pour yourselves a drink and settle in for an evening of noir. Cheers, everyone. So, here is the no longer ratty, no longer tatty hat. For those of you who haven't been with us before, that is our second hat because the first one disintegrated on my floor. First out of the hat is Joe Lansdale. Got all the books lined up tonight, feeling confident that I'm not going to mess this up. Joe Lansdale is the author of over 45 novels and more than 30 short story collections. I forgot to mention, if you hear something impressive like what I've just read out, please give us a woo. That would be really handy. Joe is impossible to categorise by genre, as he has written westerns, horror, science fiction, comic books, and mystery and suspense. He has had both novels and shorts adapted for film and TV, including Cold in July, Bubba Hotep, which is a tale of Elvis Presley and JFK battling a soul-sucking Egyptian mummy in a nursing home, and 3 seasons of his Hap and Leonard series, which is now available on Amazon Prime and stars James Purfoy and Michael Kenneth Williams in the title roles. Among many awards for his work, Joe has received the World Horror Convention Grand Master Award in 2007, woo! And the Raymond Chandler Award for Lifetime Achievement in 2015. Wow. In addition to that, he's won 10 Bram Stoker Awards and a Lifetime Achievement, an Edgar, and in 2012 was inducted into the Texas Literary Hall of Fame. Woo! I don't really know what he's doing here tonight, but we're delighted to have him. So tonight we are absolutely thrilled, all the way from East Texas, to introduce Joe Lansdale. Give us a round of applause.
Hello. I guess I start reading right away. The Boy Who Became Invisible. The place where I grew up was a little town called Marble Creek. Not much happened there that is well remembered by anyone outside of the town, but things went on. And what I'm aware of now is how much things really don't change. We just know more than we used to because there are more of us and we have easier ways to communicate, excitement, and misery than in the old days. Marble Creek was nestled along the edge of the Sabine River, which is not a wide river as rivers go. Not that deep except in rare spots, but it is a long river and it winds all through East Texas. Back then there were more trees than now, and where wild animals ran, concrete and houses shined bright in the sunlight. Our little school wasn't much and I hated going. I liked staying home and reading books I wanted to read and running the then considerable woods and fishing the creeks for crawdads. Summers and afternoons and weekends, I did that with my friend Jesse. I knew Jesse's parents lived differently than we did, and though we didn't have money and would probably have been called poor by the standards of the early 60s, Jesse's family still lived out on a farm where they used an outhouse and plowed with mules, raised most of the food they ate, drew water from a well, but curiously had electricity and a big tall TV antenna that sprouted beside their house and could be adjusted for better reception by reaching through the living room window and turning it with a twist of the hands. Jesse's dad was quick to use the razor strop on Jesse's butt and back for things my parents would have thought unimportant, or at worst, an offense that required words, not blows. Jesse and I liked to play Tarzan, and we took turns at it until we finally both decided to be Tarzan and ended up being the Tarzan twins. It was a great mythology we created, and we ran the woods and climbed trees, and on Saturday we watched Jungle Theater at my house, which showed, if we were lucky, Tarzan or Jungle Jim movies, and if not so lucky, Bamba movies. About fifth grade, there was a shift in dynamics. Jesse's poverty began to be an issue for some of the kids at school. He brought his lunch in a sack since he couldn't afford the cafeteria, and all his clothes came from the Salvation Army. He arrived at history class one morning wearing socks with big S's on them, which stood for nothing related to him, and he immediately became the target of James Williford and Ronnie Ken. They made a remark about how the S stood for sardines, which would account for how Jesse smelled. And sadly, I remember thinking at that age that that was a pretty funny crack until I looked at Jesse's slack white face and saw him tremble beneath that patched Salvation Army shirt. Our teacher came in then, Mr. Waters, and he caught part of the conversation. He said, "Those are nice socks you got there, Jesse. Not many people can have monogram socks. It's a sign of sophistication, something a few around here lack." It was a nice try, but I think it only made Jesse feel all the more miserable. And he put his head down on his desk and didn't lift it the entire class. And Mr. Waters didn't say a word to him. When class was over, Jesse was up and out. And as I was leaving, Mr. Waters caught me by the arm. "I saw you laughing when I came in. You've been that boy's friend since the two of you were knee-high to a legless grasshopper." I didn't mean to. I said, "I didn't think." "Yeah, well, you ought to." That hit me pretty hard, but I'm ashamed to say, not hard enough. I don't know when it happened, but it got so when Jesse came over, I found things to do, homework or some chore around the house, which was silly because unlike Jesse, I didn't really have any chores. In time, he quit stopping by, and I would see him in the halls of school, and we'd nod to each other, but seldom speak. The relentless picking and nagging from James and Ronnie continued, and as they became interested in girls, it increased. And Marilyn Townsend didn't help either. She was a lovely young thing and as cruel as they come. One day, Jesse surprised us by coming to the cafeteria with his sack lunch. He usually ate outside on one of the stoops, but he came in this day and he sat at the table by himself. And when Marilyn went by, he watched her. And when she came back with her tray, he stood up and smiled, politely asked if she would like to sit with him. She laughed. I remember that laugh to this day. It was as cold as a knife blade in the back and easily as sharp. I saw Jesse's face drain until it was white, and she went on by laughing, not even saying a word, just laughing. And pretty soon everyone in the place was laughing, and Marilyn came by me, and she looked at me, and heaven help me, I saw those eyes of hers and those lips, and whatever made all the other boys jump did the same to me, and I laughed. Jesse gathered up his sack and went out. It was at this point that James and Ronnie came up with a new approach. They decided to treat Jesse as if he were a ghost, as if he were invisible. We were expected to do the same. So as not to be mean to Jesse, but being careful not to burn my bridges with the in crowd, I avoided him altogether. But there were times, here and there, when I would see him walking down the hall, and on the rare occasions when he spoke, students pretended not to hear him, or James would respond with some remark like, "Do you hear a duck quacking?" When Jesse spoke to me, if no one was looking, I would nod. This went on into the 9th grade, and it became such a habit, it was as if Jesse didn't exist, as if he really were invisible. I almost forgot about him, though I did note in math class one day there were stripes of blood across his back, seeping through his old worn shirt, his father, and the razor strop. Jesse had nowhere to turn. One afternoon, I was in the cafeteria just about to get in line when Jesse came in carrying his sack. It was the first time he'd been there since the incident with Marilyn some years before. I saw him come in, his head slightly down, walking as if on a mission. As he came near me for the first time in a long time, for no reason I can explain, I said, "Hi, Jesse." He looked up at me, surprised, and nodded the way I did to him in the hall, and kept walking. There was a table in the center of the cafeteria, and that was the table James and Ronnie and Marilyn had claimed. And as Jesse came closer for the first time in a long time, they really saw him. Maybe it was because they were surprised to see him in his paper sack in a place he hadn't been in ages. Or maybe they sensed something. Jesse pulled a small revolver from his sack, and before anyone knew what was happening, he fired 3 times, knocking all 3 of them to the floor. The place went nuts, people running in all directions. Me, I froze. Then, like a soldier, he wheeled and marched back my way. As he passed me, he turned his head, smiled, said, "Hey, Hap." Then he was out the door. I wasn't thinking clearly because I turned and went out in the hall behind him, and the history teacher, Mr. Waters, saw him with a gun, said something, and the gun snapped again and Waters went down. Jesse walked all the way to the double front door, which was flung wide open to that time of day, stepped out into the light and lifted the revolver. I heard it pop and saw his head jump, and he went down. My knees went out from under me, and I sat down right there in the hall, unable to move. When they went out to tell his parents what had happened to him, that Marilyn was disfigured, Ronnie wounded, and James and Mr. Waters were dead, they discovered them in bed where Jesse had shot them in their sleep. The razor strop lay across them like a dead snake. That's the boy who became invisible. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that, Joe. We have a couple of questions for you here, if you wouldn't mind answering them.
Okay.
So Dan Stubbings would like to know, would first of all like to say, Leonard is such a strong black gay character. What made you write him and where did he come from?
Well, you know, Hap and Leonard are based on people I know. Hap is based a lot on me and the jobs I did back then. And I met a lot of different people. And I kind of put them all together that I thought were interesting, the ones I thought were interesting, into Leonard. So I knew black, gay, you know, and people like, and Republicans too. So black Republicans, which were kind of like, you know, a one-legged rhinoceros back in that time. You didn't see that back when I first created Hap and Leonard. So I just sort of took people I knew and ideas I had, and I thought it was a great way for people on different sides of the fence to kind of present their views in books, and for the books to be a little more than just shoot 'em ups. Great,
thank you. And Alex Hurley would like to know what it is specifically you like about coming of age novels.
I think I must have grown up reading them. You know, To Kill a Mockingbird was a big thing with me. I really, really liked that novel, and you know, and a lot of other things, like Huckleberry Finn, and you could, you know, there's a long list that I could name. But I think it's also that whole point when you have innocence, and then you realize that the world isn't quite as simple or as nice as you would like for it to be.
Great, thank you. And thank you so much for taking time out of your day today to join us. It's been a real honor to host you. Thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so another one of Simon's literary heroes there. That face that I just pulled is clearly what Simon's doing right now, just so you know. So our next reader this evening, don't forget to give me a drum roll please, is Charlotte Levin. Charlotte Levin. Oh. Now I started the show the other week showing you that I was reading this book, and this is Charlotte's book. It's coming out tomorrow. Charlotte has been shortlisted for the Andrea Badenoch Award, which is part of the New Writing North Awards, as well as being shortlisted for the Mislexia Short Story Competition. Woo! Charlotte lives in Manchester, and If I Can't Have You is her debut novel. Ruth Jones described this book as one of the best books I've ever read. And who am I to disagree with Ruth Jones? It's certainly my book of 2020, and that's saying something. So without further ado, everyone, please, huge round of applause for the lovely Charlotte Levin.
Thank you, Vic. Thank you. I think I should just give you a little bit of I think, because I'm reading something further on in the novel, if that's okay. Basically, it's about a young woman who she's fled Manchester for London, after her mother's death, and she starts an affair with a doctor at the medical practice where she's a receptionist, and they have a fairly end, and the novel is basically her inability to let go and her descent into obsession, basically. And it's a little bit further on where she goes to a party in the hope that she will leave with him. It was 9 o'clock, and for half an hour I'd been forced to talk to Linda and her husband, racist Graham, about topics such as why they were convinced I'd soon die if I didn't eat some meat, their new hot tub, and how Nigel Farage was the only one telling it like it is. I perched on the edge of a claret velvet chaise, nodding politely. My feelings about Linda vindicated. Any grains of guilt I had for hating her evaporated into the air, along with Graham's spit, which sprayed out with each offensive utterance. Across the room, I saw you in deep conversation with Dr. Harris. I tried to lip read whilst enjoying Graham's story about the supposedly unfriendly Muslim man on their street. I could decipher your words, but I was scared you were being talked into a permanent return to Harley Street. In contrast, you didn't look over my way, not once. You didn't feel my presence, want to save me. At 9:30, I could bear it no longer. Your conversation with Harris had ended some time ago, and you'd now disappeared. I had to find you, talk to you. I excused myself from Adolf and Ava, determined to corner you, but as I was heading for the lounge door, the lights went off and Mrs. Harris was wheeling in her trolley, on which perched a huge candlelit cake with crackling sparklers. The guests began to sing, "Happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you." Dr. Harris took centre stage, repeating, thank you all, as the room sang off key. It took forever for him to blow out the 50 candles. At one point, I thought he might die before extinguishing the last flame. You disappeared. Dizzy with champagne and frustration, I needed to escape for a while, gather myself and have a fag. I slipped away as everyone cheered and pretended Harris was a jolly good fellow, when I'm sure they too thought he was a wanker. Outside was bliss. As the door shut behind me, I stood in the spotlight once again. I wondered if I would even go back in. The night air was cool. The breeze kissed my skin, covered me in goosebumps. I enjoyed the shivering. I crossed over the road to see if there was a way getting into the garden square, but the gate was locked, so I returned to my earlier observation spot, rested against the railings and lit a fag. The interior of the house appeared brighter in contrast to the now blackened sky, but I couldn't watch that show anymore. I was separate from them, different. Instead, I perched on the narrow rim of concrete holding the metal fence in place, slipped off my shoes to circle my poor bruised feet and closed my eyes, enjoying the nicotine and my freedom. They jolted open again to the sound of Harris's door slamming. The security light switched on. And there you were. It wasn't just you though, was it? She was draped on your arm, laughing like the moron she was, as if you were hilarious. But you weren't hilarious, Samuel. You were not funny at all. My breath locked high in my chest. Had I been standing, I think I would have keeled over. You didn't see me, not because it was dark, but because you were too busy kissing her, touching her, pressing yourself against that fucking belly. Swaying, you took her by the hand. She wasn't even drunk. She was just posh, a party girl. That's what they're called, isn't it? Whereas if she was poor, she'd be a slapper. Was I just a slapper to you? How were you not aware of me in the shadows? How could you not sense such hurt happening so near to you? You walked away, hand in hand, on the same side of the road as me, oblivious, laughing, kissing, laughing. I knew what that walk meant. I'd been on one oh so recently, hadn't I? Without warning, I threw up on the pavement between my legs. It sizzled on the concrete. Once I'd raised my head, I'd lost you in the darkness. The merriment continued through the window, the world still turning like it always does. I didn't cry. I didn't even want to cry. I retrieved my mother's spattered shoes and scrambled in my bag for a tissue. There wasn't one, only the cross-cutter receipt which merely smeared the vile juice from one part of the shoe to the other, and which I then had to discard on the ground as a snapshot in this lovely part of London that showed me up for what I was. On the tube, I stared at myself in the window opposite. My ghost, her ghost. We were the same. To others, I'm sure I appeared blank, lifeless. But inside were images of the two of you I couldn't erase, images I had created. You kissing her naked body, fucking her from behind, a perverted mood I couldn't switch off. I fully intended to go home. You must believe me. It was at Ealing Common that the shit happened. I climbed the steps of the station and stopped midway. A man tutted at me for blocking his exit, but I didn't care, didn't move, didn't give a shit about anything other than what you'd done. And as I stood, people passing me by, it rose from my blistered feet and spread through me like a wildfire. There was no conscious journey between standing there and standing outside your flat. It was trance-like, hypnotic. Can we sleepwalk while awake? You'd know, Doctor. I leant against your car, looked up at your window. The lounge light was on. I couldn't breathe, knowing what was going on in there, drinking, talking, kissing, listening to music, our song. They're sitting where I should have been sitting, lying where I should have been lying. I lit a cigarette, took an elongated pull. Do you have any idea how you made me feel? Do you understand now? The inner force that pulled the metal striker wheel of the lighter towards your car like a magnet. What made me press hard, deep into the metallic paint, silently screaming until my possessed hands stopped the contact. I couldn't look at what I'd done and remove my shoes for a quicker escape. With bare feet on the cold concrete, I was diminished in every sense. I should have just walked away, and I would have done had I not foolishly glanced up at your window one last time. The lounge is now black. The bedroom shone with the familiar soft glow of your copper lamp. The images played stronger, more vividly. Your sweaty bodies stopped, smashing against each other. Please stop, melding together in ways I knew. No, her hair laced through your hand, her mouth on your mouth. I can't bear it, on her tits and that fucking belly. Please make it stop. The shoes dropped to the ground. My hands felt for my head. Each finger grappled chunks of my hair, tangled in tight fists as you did into her. I released the matted locks and bent down to retrieve the shoes. Rose again. The left one swung off my left index finger. The right gripped by the middle of the arch. The metal-tipped, spiked heel faced the side window of your car, and I shattered it like you'd shattered me.
Thank you very much. Thank you for being here with us tonight, and best of luck tomorrow with the launch. It's great.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so we only have 9 speakers this week. So we'll have this next person. I've just flung a bit of paper on the table, and then we'll go to a break. So, drum roll please. It is Caroline Mitchell, who, it's actually her launch day today, I believe. Caroline Mitchell originates from Ireland and now lives with her family in a village on the coast of Essex. A former police detective, she has worked in CID and specialised in roles dealing with vulnerable victims, high-risk victims of domestic abuse and serious sexual offences. Caroline is a New York Times, USA Today, Washington Post, and international #1 best-selling author, woo, with over 1 million books sold. Wow. Caroline writes psychological and crime thrillers. The most recent, Silent Victim, reached #1 in the Amazon charts in the UK, USA, and Australia, and was the winner of the Reader's Favourite Awards in the psychological thriller category. So please give a huge round of applause and raise your drinks for Caroline Mitchell.
Hi everyone, I hope you can hear me okay. Do let me know. I'm on the Prosecco tonight because my book launched today, so I'm just going to read from the prologue, which is mercifully short. Just as well. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Okay, so this is the Left 4 Dead. So you're kind of entering into the mind of a serial killer straight away. So nothing too gory though, don't worry. Okay. Samuel relaxed into his leather chair. Elegant yet modern, his corner office gleamed with polished chrome and artful design. Like many contemporary spaces in central London, his windows were floor length and wall to wall. None of his colleagues questioned the telescope fixed on the streets below. His unconventional approach to advertising had earned him the reputation as a people watcher, and many tried to emulate him. If only they knew just how much he enjoyed getting under people's skin. The vibration of his mobile phone diverted his attention, the image of his family flashing up on the screen. He answered without hesitation. "Guess what, Daddy, guess what?" Megan's excited tones filtered down the line. People said she was the image of him, with her brooding brown eyes and mahogany hair. She was advanced, too. At the age of 6, she was more than capable of dialing his number. However, such phone calls were strictly limited to special occasions. Megan had been fussing over her wobbly tooth for weeks now. The lisp in her voice warmed Samuel's heart. "Oh, what could it be?" he teased. "Has the cat had kittens?" "No," Megan giggled. "Harvey's a boy." "So he is. Let me see. Has Mummy grown a beard?" Another giggle. "Don't be silly, Daddy." "You'd better tell me what it is then." Samuel's smile carried on his voice. Like his wife, he still retained his Essex accent and remained true to his roots. "My tooth came out," Megan squeaked, barely able to contain her excitement. "Nice one. You know what that means, don't you? The tooth fairy will be visiting you tonight." Unlike her older sister, Megan had been planned. Things were so much nicer this time around. Now they weren't stressing out over money. Megan wanted for nothing, which was exactly how Samuel liked it. As his daughter chatted, his eyes roved around the room. He called it splitting, his ability to interact in a perfectly normal conversation, while at the same time giving the darker side of his nature free rein. He could easily conduct a presentation on digital trends while contemplating how much force was needed to keep a victim compliant but unbruised. His eyes fell on the advertising market masterpieces lining his walls. These were the campaigns that had earned him his large family home in Notting Hill. To his right, a framed photo of his wife and 2 children stood on his desk. To his left was an industry award. The necklace he had bought as an anniversary present for his wife was stored in the top drawer of his desk. The second drawer was locked, his own personal treasure trove. Samuel's thoughts returned to home as Marianne took over the phone. "Put Laura on, I want a quick word." Their older daughter had taken part in a school project, a mock dragon dens of sorts. "She's out with her friends." "Again?" Samuel groaned. "Why didn't you tell her to come straight home?" "Like you did when you were 16, Marianne replied. "She's just gone for a pizza. You can't control her every minute of the day." "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing," Marianne replied hastily. "You're not working over the weekend, are you? Don't forget, we've got the award ceremony on Monday night. It would be nice to have some quality time before then." "This weekend, I'm all yours." Samuel tempered his troubled thoughts. "I'd come home now, but I've got some important clients over from Japan. I've promised to show them the sights." When he said clients, there was just one. Mr. Hamasaki was his alibi for the night. A few drinks, then on to a gentleman's club. Thanks to a sedative-laced chaser, Hamasaki would spend the rest of the night asleep, with little recollection of events the next day. The voice deep inside him, smug and admiring, filtered through as he ended the call. "You lie so well." His breath quickened, his heart beating a little harder in the confines of his chest. He could hardly believe he was going through with his plan. Would it live up to the fantasy? He leaned forward and buzzed his intercom. Naomi, his secretary, answered promptly. "Yes?" "Put everything on hold for 10 minutes, will you, babe? I've got an important call to make." "Sure thing, boss." He smiled to himself. He could get away with a term of endearment when it came to Naomi. She wasn't the most qualified secretary, but she was warm, bubbly, and down to earth. Most importantly, she was grateful for her job. His previous secretaries had acted like they were doing him a favor by just turning up for work. People used to look down their noses at him because he lacked their eloquence, and his open university degree was initially frowned upon. But over the years, he earned his clients' trust. Nowadays, his rag to riches story was compared to that of Lord Sugar, and Samuel was determined to emulate his success. Plucking a key from his breast pocket, he unlocked the second drawer of his desk. Gently, it rolled on its runners, revealing its treasures within. Samuel's wealth gave him the ability to buy anything his heart desired and holiday anywhere in the world. But the thrill of building his empire had faded after making his first 5 million last year, at the age of 35. These days, everything came too easy, forcing him to look elsewhere for kicks. He picked up his black leather notebook, which contained thoughts too dark to voice. Each page was stained with the ink of his fountain pen, listing details and routines of the women who had caught his interest. It was more than a black book. It was his murder list. After thumbing through the pages, he reached for his most priceless possession. The carefully folded scrap of material represented an invitation into a euphoric world known to very few. He lifted up the handkerchief, his gaze falling on the other trinkets. A faded train ticket, a lock of hair. Each one signified a moment etched on the fabric of his being. They had made him the man he was today. Closing his eyes, he brushed the handkerchief against his face, invoking a sense that remained in his memory. It had come from a pack of 7, each one embroidered with the day of the week. It was threadbare now, but he didn't see the phrase or the material yellowed with time. All he saw was her face. The image burned into his psyche. In his youth had followed him into adulthood. Now more than ever, he found himself returning to a world he thought he had left behind. His arousal grew as he allowed himself to delve deeper into her memory, but this was not the place. Reluctantly, he opened his eyes, carefully folding the handkerchief and placing it back into the drawer. He checked his watch. A few more minutes to think about what was to come. Focusing his telescope on the streets below, he watched pedestrians milling about just as he did on his daily commute to and from work. The February sunshine was not strong enough to offer protection from the chilly breeze, and most people were wrapped in coats and woolly scarves. He trained his gaze on a 30-something man in a business suit, waiting to cross the road. Did he have hidden desires too? Needs to be fulfilled? It gave Samuel a kick to think that he was part of a secret society. How many people like him walked the streets of London? How many brushed against him as he boarded the tube? He could blend into any situation. He was a father, a husband, a respected work colleague. Just an ordinary man you could pass on the street without a second glance. But his hobby took him out of his mundane life, releasing a tsunami of emotion buried since his teens. In his left breast pocket nestled a powdered white substance that would ensure his victim's compliance. Nothing had been left to chance. His thoughts were beautifully horrific, far removed from his phone call with his daughter minutes before. That's it.
Thank you so much for that, Caroline. We've got a couple of questions in here for you. May would like to know, what are the ravens in the background about?
Oh, I love ravens. I've got a huge tattoo of a raven on my arm.
Nice.
I've always had a fascination for them, and that's Edgar. He's stuffed. He was roadkill. He wasn't harmed in any way. I bought him stuffed, and yeah, I just love them. I'm hugely fascinated by them. Always have been.
Fantastic. And Brian Stewart would like to know, and we did warn you this was coming, is that the next novel being planned with?
Oh my God! Look at these.
Oh,
I've got 2 on the go at the moment, so I have to be really organized. But yes, all color coded and everything. I'm doing edits at the same time, so it's a bit of a juggling act at the moment. But yeah, all good fun.
okay, so hold the book up once more. Happy publication day, everyone.
Thank you. I've had a bit of this today, so
enjoy it. You've earned it. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Okay, so we are going to go to a break now, and let Caroline enjoy her tipple. So we're going to go to a break. We'll be back in 5 minutes. Thank you very much.
just thinking of you and the way you look tonight. You're lovely with your smile so warm and your cheeks so soft. There is nothing for me but to love you and the way you look tonight. With each word your tenderness grows, tearing my fears apart. And that laugh that wrinkles your nose, it touches my foolish heart. Lovely, never ever change. Keep that breathless charm. Won't you please arrange it? 'Cause I love you and the way you look tonight. With each word your tenderness grows, tearing my fears apart. And that laugh that wrinkles your nose, it touches my foolish heart. Lovely, never ever change. Keep that breathless charm. Won't you please arrange it? 'Cause I love you and the way you look tonight.
Welcome back. Who's next? Thanks for all of your chat in the chat. It's always nice to see the same people, new people, different people. It's all fun. So thank you very much for joining us, as always. Our next reader tonight is Fiona Veitch Smith. So allow me to tell you about Fiona. So close. There it is. Every week the same. I don't know why you keep tuning in, to be honest, folks. Fiona Veitch Smith is the author of the Poppy Denby investigates novels. They're a golden age style murder mysteries set in the 1920s about a reporter sleuth who works for a London tabloid. The first book in the series, The Jazz Files, was shortlisted for the CWA Historical Dagger, while subsequent books have been shortlisted for the Forward Review Mystery Novel of the Year and the People's Book Prize. Woo! The fifth book in the series, The Art Fiasco, which is set in Newcastle, will be coming out in October. Fiona is formerly a journalist, having worked on the arts and crime beats of a Cape Town newspaper and lectured in lectured in journalism at Newcastle Uni for 10 years, as well as creative writing at Northumbria for 7 years. She now works as a freelance editor and writing coach and is the Assistant Secretary of the Crime Writers Association. So everybody, big round of applause for Fiona.
Hi everyone, can you hear me? This is not the usual device that I use. Can someone give me a thumbs up? Clap, clap, clap. Thumbs up, excellent, great. Right, I'm going to be reading this evening from an extract from the new book that's coming out, The Art Fiasco, coming out in October. What you need to know is that the young girl in this extract has just had sex with her art teacher, and she's coming home just after that's happened. So you need to understand that in order to understand what's about to happen in this section. Agnes picked up her skirt and hurried across the road, then down the alley that ran alongside the colliery terraces, her clogs clacking on the cobbles. The Robson house was on the very end of 11th Row, the street closest to the pit. The pit bell rang, jangling her nerves. The dad would be home soon from his shift. He'd be wanting his bath, then his tea, then he'd head down the Kit and Cuddy for a few pints with his mates. Only when their father had left for the pub would the Robson children be able to have their baths. She would have to help wash the little uns first, then Agnes would have her turn. Then her mam, her brother, 11-year-old Jemmy, would have a bath on the morrow when he got back from the night shift in the pit. She spotted Jemmy's dark head bowing into the pigeon coop at the top of the vegetable allotment, backing onto their house. One of his birds had won top prize at the last community gala, coming first in the race from Morpeth to Ashington. It was only 5 miles, but he was dead proud of it. Agnes smiled. Jemmy was a clever lad and a gentle soul, too good for the pit. But what choice did he have? What choice did any of them have? She turned the corner into 11th Row and startled the neighbour's cat, stalking a rat down the middle of the railway track. Each row of terraces, 96 houses per street, was separated by a rail line which, every morning, carried in coal for the heating and carried out night soil from the outside toilets. They were known as netties. There was one nettie for every 2 houses. The Robsons were a family of 6, their neighbours 8. The cat hissed at Agnes. Agnes hissed back. She opened the little gate, past the coal shed and pushed open the kitchen door. And there before her was the scene she had just imagined when talking to Mrs. Denby. Her mam was peeling potatoes while a 4-year-old brother Frank clung to a pinny, and the baby, Emma, cried in the crib. Her mother looked up, her eyes bone-weary. The babby needs a new nappy. Thought you'd never get back. What took you so long? Agnes made a point of putting some money in the tea caddy on the shelf, and then turned to pick up her baby sister. The stench hit her like the whiff of a slop bucket. I was talking to Mrs. Denby, the Reverend's wife. The Methodist? Aye, she was asking if I was coming to Sunday school on the morrow. Mrs. Robson sniffed and rubbed her nose with the back of her hand. I'll need you at home. Aye, that's what I told her. Agnes put down a towel on the proggy mat in front of the fire, where the cauldron of water was boiling for her dad's bath. The tin tub would be unhooked from its peg on the wall when her dad was ready. She lay down her wriggling baby sister and unhooked the nappy pins. The child had produced a good-sized stool. She wiped the bottom clean, rolled up the old nappy to be emptied later into the netty and put a fresh one on. Clean, warm, and finally getting some attention, the baby grabbed at Agnes's pigtail that swung tantalizingly across the child's face. Agnes smiled and tickled her tummy, eliciting a delightful giggle from the youngest member of the family. Worried that he would be missing out on the fun, the 4-year-old also made his way to the mat and threw his arms around his older sister's neck. "Oh, can we play pit ponies, Aggie?" "Aye, pet, after tea. All right, I need help our mam first." Mrs. Robson smiled. "Thanks, pet. When you finish there, get the bacon with the larder, will you?" "Aye, ma'am." Mrs. Robson suddenly stopped and looked intently at her eldest daughter, kneeling on the floor. "What's that on the back of your pinafore?" Agnes looked over her shoulder, trying to see what her mother was referring to. "There on the hem." Her mother put down the potato knife and walked over to the hearth. She bent down and ran her finger along the hem of Agnes's skirt. She stood up straight, her lips pursed, her finger erect and accusing. Agnes swallowed hard. Her mother's finger was coated in bright ochre oil paint, the same colour she had used to change the foliage on her painting from summer to autumn. "Have ye been gannon behind me back?" What do you mean?" "Don't play coy with me, missy. You've been gannon to that art place instead of working, when I told you not to." "I haven't. I put 4 shillings in the caddy. Mrs. Madsen gave me the full amount. Check for yourself if you don't believe me." Mrs. Robson pulled back her hand and slapped her daughter across the face. "Don't use that tone of voice with me, lass." Agnes fought hard to hold back the tears. Then she walked to the caddy and emptied it onto the table, flicking out the 4 shillings she'd just put in. "See, it's all there. Count it yourself if the money's all you care about." Her mother's face softened, and she reached out a hand and patted her daughter's shoulder. "No, pet, the money's not all I care about. And I'm sorry I hit you, but..." She cupped Agnes's chin in her hand and stroked her cheek with her thumb, trying to wipe away the redness of the slap. "I've been hearing things about that posh bloke who comes up from the toon. He never tried anything with you when you was there, did he?" Agnes pulled away from her mother, making a show of putting the money back into the caddy. "What you mean? Try anything? Oh, don't be coy, lass, you know." Agnes sighed and put the lid back on the caddy. Her face was still stinging from her mother's slap. "Aye, I do. But no, ma'am, no. He didn't try anything when I was there." "You swear?" "Aye, ma'am, I swear." The Morpeth Herald. Body found in Ashington Pit. The body of a man has been found at the bottom of Ashington Pit. The dead man was discovered last Sunday morning at the change of shift. It is believed his neck was broken. The man has been identified as Mr. Michael Brownlee, 28, of Newcastle upon Tyne. Mr. Brownlee, who was a lecturer at the Newcastle School of Art at the University College, ran free art classes for the children of Pitman in Ashington and Hurst. He'd been running the classes at St. John's in Hurst most Sundays since June. It is unclear how Mr. Brownlee came to be near the pit, which is over a mile from the church and not in the vicinity of the railway station. The miners who found the body at the bottom of a shaft, temporarily shut for maintenance, say they smelled alcohol on his breath and that his clothes were muddy and dishevelled. Police said that Mr. Brownlee was last seen at the Kincuddy public house having a drink. They speculate that he may have been intoxicated and become disorientated on his way back to the train station. Police are asking for any witnesses who may have seen Mr. Brownlee leaving the Kincuddy around 8 o'clock to contact them. Mr. Brownlee is survived by his widow, who's expecting their first child. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Fiona. We have a question from Alex Hurley. He says he just read your short story in Noir from the Bar, and he would like to know what your inspiration for it was.
For that, Another Man's Shoes.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, the inspiration came from a great uncle of mine who was a pianist. And the family story was that he got on the train one day and disappeared and never came back again. And he was a classical pianist, but he apparently always used to enjoy playing a little bit of jazz. And he said he was just going down to London to go and see if he could try out at a jazz club, but he disappeared and never came back again, and no one ever knew what happened to him. And that was the inspiration. I made up a story spun completely away from my great uncle, of course, but I asked myself the question, what might have happened to my great uncle? And there was no child abuse or anything like that in his life, as far as I know. He was gay. He was a gay man, and in that period, of course, it was completely illegal. And it was believed that that's really what motivated him to leave Newcastle and to go down to London. And I made up a story of what might have happened. And of course, I very much doubt that he was arrested for someone else's murder, but who knows?
Great, thank you very much, and thanks for joining us this evening. Okay, who's next? Oh, got two out there. I'll have to go back in. There we go. It is G.B. Williams. G.B. Williams writes contemporary crime. She's English by birth and Welsh by choice. G.B. likes to explore the differences between people and places. In her upcoming book, The Chair, G.B. brings the frantic greed of the southeast into direct conflict with the tough living of Welsh mountain life. So everybody, a huge round of applause for G.B. Williams.
Hi, as Vic said, I'm G.B. Williams. I'm going to read an extract from The Chair. It's the start of my next book, which should come out in autumn this year. So here you go. Chapter 1, Alex, Belsize Park. Why on earth would I agree to that? Alex asked. I made you. Mark was adamant, indignant even. Alex disagreed. Mark Levinson wasn't the elite music journalist he liked to believe. And he dressed like a teenager from the 80s, Alex thought. Blue jeans, white t-shirt, leather blues on, and all topped off with a thinning mop of curly hair, treacherously showing the dye marks. But Mark knew too much. At the start, Alex had considered it a worthwhile risk. Now he wasn't sure. Mark could prove dangerous if not kept on side. The journalist sat forward, snarling. I could unmake you. Unlikely. The truth would unmake Grebe okay, but there was a good chance the facts would enhance Alex Beringer's own reputation. It was a different truth that would drag them both into the mire. Thankfully, Mark didn't know that truth. At least Alex hoped not. Look, said Mark, trying a placating tone. Think of it this way. After the theft of Grebe Okay's last single, this can be his right to reply. He's known for not giving interviews, so releasing one now could get the public sympathy back on his side. Alex considered. Mark was good at looking after Mark. If Mark got an exclusive interview, it would put his editor on side. And if that meant looking after Alex et al., then so much the better. I can't guarantee anything. You're the golden boy, Mark smiled, apparently thinking he'd won. Granger won't say no to you. There was no guarantee of that either, and disagreement from Granger could be fatal, if he was lucky. Chapter 2, Simon's Home Counties. From the quiet office, Simons looked out over the immaculate garden, immaculate thanks to no work of his own. All he did was pay the gardener. He might potter out there, deadhead a thing or two, but that was as green-fingered as he got. He did appreciate the result, however. The restful view provided a point of calm when his mind failed to find any. Now the garden wore the colours of winter. It matched his mood to perfection. The business was successful, his clients were happy, but one failure haunted him. Letting a friend down was never good enough. Letting one die was worse. Now another case bothered him. Though strictly speaking, it wasn't a case. No one was paying him to investigate this. But far too many times there was a name muttered around the edges of his other cases. The name stuck, it echoed, nagged. Simons recognised that accusations could be unfounded, but not this many, not this consistently, and not with so much fear from the accusers that they barely dare speak the name. And though a single utterance might conjure the devil. So Simons crept carefully around the perimeter of the other man's life. He kept his eyes and his ears open. If anything happened, he wanted to know, wanted to be ready. He also wanted to be sure he wasn't enacting some petty vendetta. A chance existed, slim though it might be, that the man was not the villain he'd been painted. Simons didn't want to drive an innocent man into the ground, but if the accusations and the fear, the whispers were true, he'd find a villain hiding behind the veneer of money and power. Chapter 3, Branwen and Cobb, Cadaridris. Steep and rugged, the rough ground was treacherous underfoot. The spiky grasses stood angled and hard, ready to strike, to stab. The mountain skeleton lay exposed as rock, dictated shape, dictated obstinance. Frozen winds howled, buffeted, bit extremities, searched for roots through layers of clothing, sought to drag intruders to the edge and beyond. Icy poniards rained into eyes. Then, quick as a thin finger snap, the mountain might turn, as the Welsh would say, proper nasty like. Slogging up the track, the volunteers of the mountain rescue reached the coordinates they'd been given. Looking over the ledge, no walker came into view. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the rain stopped, the mountain finally offering them a break. The big grey dog, who had obediently stayed by the tallest man's side, padded a few more metres along the ledge. Its sensitive nose tested the air and it looked down. Irish wolfhounds weren't bloodhounds, but they were still better at detecting scent than any human. The group looked down the steep slope of the mountain. Low hanging cloud around Llyn Cai parted like curtains. The bright yellow of the man's jacket marked him where he'd slipped on the scree. Even from where they stood, the unnatural bend in the man's leg was obvious. Wolverton, you and two, there, Cobb pointed to a flat, stable area 2 metres to his left. Finn, the dog, whined in response to a call to heel, which got him out of the way. The other two here with me. Jones, you'll go down with the stretcher and get the walker onto it. Cobb stood at the ledge, the toes of his walking boots peeking over. While not his place to order this crew, he'd done so automatically. He was the most familiar with these situations. He knew how to get men back. The dry heat of Camdesh was the opposite of cold, wet Snowdonia, however. Here on Cadaridris, the elements froze his bones, but retrieval was retrieval. Stepping back, he turned to Branwen Jones, preparing her harness. The only woman in the group and the local vet, in the absence of the doctor on this call-out, she was the best first aider they had. Even as Michael Wolverton, group lead, called down reassurances to the walker, Cobb moved to face Branwen. Her nose glowed red, her cheeks white, and that was pretty much all of her that was visible under the thick four-season clothing and the hat tied over her ears and under her chin. Some would say it looked ridiculous. He thought it looked warm, sensible. "Are you okay with this?" he asked as she buckled the climbing belt. "Of course," she shouted over the wind and didn't look at her as she checked the buckles. "You belaying for me?" Any of the team could do it, but he felt more confident with her life in his hands. "I will." Easing his pack to the ground, he got into his own belt. Once the rope was sorted, they checked each other's harnesses for security and hold. Branwen took his waist buckle and pulled it tighter for a firmer fit. "You never do that tight enough." He did, he just liked it when she tightened it. She checked again and looked up at him. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded. "But do me a favour, don't stand so close to the edge as you were before. That's scary to see when you're on your own. I don't want to see it when my life is in your hands." He nodded as she stepped back. The lifting cage would be lowered down to her, but the medkit she'd need was strapped to her back. Ropes were thrown down towards the mark, and when she was ready, she looked to Cobb. He braced, took up the last of the slack, and then she started to lean back, to abseil down to the fallen walker. Branwen pushed down the inevitable bile as she crested the edge. She trusted her abilities. She could do this. She'd learned to climb for two reasons. Firstly, this was her mountain, her home. And secondly, the fear of heights would not be allowed to control her. Another step, then another. She'd take each one and finally she'd do what had to be done. The fear, however, never went away. She just had to control it. So she placed her feet carefully and looked up at the edge of the rock. She couldn't now see much of Cobb. Thankfully, he was standing back further than he had before, just as she'd asked. But she saw Finn. The big wolfhound lay on the edge of the mountain, one paw and that big stupid head looking over, watching her. The dog's mouth hung open, as she suspected he might be overheating with the exertion of getting up here, even in this cold weather. She just hoped it didn't mean she'd get a face full of drool next time she looked up. Instead, she looked down and fought the bile. Looking towards her feet, she made sure they wouldn't slip on the scree. Then she checked she was heading in the right direction for the fallen man. She was, and as she continued, her fear of heights diminished beneath concerns for the man's life. Little blood showed on the rocks, mostly it had soaked into the man's salpets, but his face stood out as very pale, his lips turning blue. His wide eyes watched her as he clung on for dear life and imminent rescue. That was good. In a situation like this, tenacity often pulled people through, more so than physical strength. With a bit of luck, it would get him through the fact that before she got him onto the stretcher, she was going to have to straighten that leg, and without anaesthetic. There you go. That's the first part of the chair. Should be out at the end of this year. And now back to our lovely host, Vic.
Thank you so much for that, Gail. Oh, straightening the foot without anaesthetic. Oh. I have a question for you, GB. Doug would like to say, great reading. Oh, it's actually not a question, more of a comment. Great reading. I'm already a huge fan of your previous books, which includes Locked Up. So can't wait to read this. So,
Lovely, thank you.
Excellent. So you say it'll be out towards the back end of the year, is that right?
Yes, it's been put on hold obviously because of the current situation, but yeah, back end of this year.
Great. Thank you very much, and thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, so because we've got 9 authors instead of 10 tonight, we're going 3, 3 and 3. So this is our last reader before the next break, and it is Russ Thomas. Russ Thomas is a former bookseller. He won the Waterstones Bookseller Bursary for his debut novel, Firewatching. Ooh. He lives in Sheffield, where the D.S. Adam Tyler series is set. The second in the series, Nighthawking, is to be published early next year. And I've seen Firewatching getting a lot of love on social media, so I'm really excited to introduce you to Russ Thomas.
Hi everyone. Thanks Vic, thanks Simon. I really appreciate you inviting me to be here. This is a real pleasure. I hope everyone can hear me okay and I'm not doing weird things because I did have a bit of a router problem just now. So obviously my mother's not pedaling hard enough in the cellar. So if I disappear, that's why. This is Firewatching, or if you're in America, it looks like this. It's the first in a new series of police procedural novels following D.S. Adam Tyler and their cold case unit, South Yorkshire's cold case unit. I'm going to read 2 short bits tonight, if you indulge me, mainly because I'm sat in my Jackanory chair and it feels a bit like this is the closest I get to being on Jackanory, so I'm going to go for it. You don't need to know much other than this opens the morning after the night before. Tyler wakes to a set of Venetian blinds that filter the sun into strips that threaten to griddle his eyelids. He gets up and moves to the window to look out at the view. Last night comes back in snatches, a series of sensations, the warm evening air on his face as they left the pub, the eyes of the taxi driver watching them interestedly in his rear view mirror, the chime on the lift doors that closed in slow motion, the scratch of stubble and the faint transferred taste of tobacco and red wine, the cold bite of steel on his exposed back. And then later, in the twisting hard muscular limbs, the tang of fresh sweat, bodies pressed together as one. He turns from the window and watches the man still sleeping. The soft breathing conjures images of fireside cats that dissipate when he notices the prominent Adam's apple pulsing under the translucent skin of the man's throat. It looks as though it's trying to break out and makes Tyler think of the facehugger from Alien. The man groans and turns on his side, light feathers of hair falling across that perfectly chiseled face. Delicately proportioned nose, square jaw, thick lips, a calculated length of fine stubble to set it all off. Too perfect, he thinks. Perfect never works. The man shifts, reaching up to the pillow with his right arm and exposing the duvet to slide off his chest to expose a sculpted washboard stomach and two hard pink nipples. His left arm bent at the elbow so the wrist disappears under the duvet, is sleeved in an intricate swirl of Celtic tattoos, like a bush of thorns or dancing black flames. He opens his eyes and looks straight at Tyler, the irises bright green in the morning sunlight. He looks almost reptilian. "Hey," he says, yawning and sitting up. Tyler moves away from the window and begins to gather his discarded clothing. The man watches him dress. "I thought we could get breakfast together," he says. He has that annoying habit of letting his voice go up at the end of every sentence, turning statements into questions. "I've got work." The man smiles. "Another time?" This time it stops just short of a question. Tyler tries just for a moment to summon up their future. Trips to IKEA to pick out furniture, lazy Sunday mornings with the paper listening to the kids playing, brunch with the lesbians. It's a what-if dream that doesn't quite take shape. Someone else's dream. "Look," he says, "this was great, but well," he shrugs and leaves it there. "I'm Oscar," says the perfect man with his rich Blackberry voice. He doesn't seem in the least perturbed by the knockback. "And I'm out of here." Tyler leaves the man smiling at him from the bed and lets himself out without another word. So I'm just going to jump forward a little bit. Tyler gets involved in the scene of a crime. He kind of forces his way onto a case where a body has been found bricked in the cellar of a country mansion. And the body is believed to be that of a missing financier, Gerald Cartwright, who disappeared 6 years ago. He's also having to work with the murder team on this one. On the patio at the side of the house, the sun rebounds off the red brick wall of the old vicarage and smacks Tyler hard in the face. It feels like someone's left the door to a kiln open. The lawn that stretches in front of them to a wooded copse a couple of 100 meters distant looks abandoned, the grass dry and brittle and peppered with thistles and wildflowers. Doggett is staring at a tree as though challenging it, or perhaps imagining the cool shade offered by its twisted limbs. "Right then, hotshot," he says, scratching at several days' growth on his chin. "Next move?" He isn't asking because he doesn't know. "We get uniformed to canvass the neighbours while we wait for Elliot's results. We can't just assume the body is Cartwright's. Bloody big coincidence if it isn't." "There was a gardener," Tyler says, "up the road. Good looking lad, was he?" Tyler knows by now not to take it personally, but that's number 3. The third one has to be answered. "Not really my type, sir, but I could put a word in for you if you like." Maybe he imagines it, but he thinks he sees the trace of a smile. Doggett's leg jiggles up and down. 6 years, he says. "Sir? This, DS Tyler, is what we on the murder team call a right bloody ball ache." The leg slows a little and he shuffles 1 foot forward, begins kicking at a clump of weeds caught between the flagstones. "Right, I'll leave you to organise things. Get uniform started on the interviews. Daly's around somewhere, will give you a hand. Where are you going?" "I thought I'd better refresh myself with the original investigation, see if we missed anything." It comes out before Tyler can stop himself. Gerald Cartwright was missed. Doggett stops kicking, turns on him and stabs a finger into his chest. "Right, listen here, son. Jordan wants you included on this. Fine. I think she must be fucking nuts. But who gives a sweet fanny A what I want, eh?" He catches sight of something above them and frowns. Tyler follows his gaze and looks up at the roof. There's a tile hanging alarmingly over the edge of the guttering. It's flapping slightly in a breeze that fails to reach them on the patio. Is this place even safe? "Builders reckon so." Doggett turns back and smiles at him. "But then, why do you think you're the one who's staying while I go back to the station?" The mention of the builders reminds Tyler of his thoughts from the cellar. Why did they start there? Doggett turns and squints at him. He shades his eyes against the glare with one hand. What? The builders. Why the cellar? Doggett shrugs. Makes sense, doesn't it? You sure the foundations are sound before working your way up? Maybe, but why knock a wall down? Why that one? It's a bit of a coincidence, isn't it? They only start work this week and they go straight to the wall where the body's buried. Doggett chews his lip for a moment and then shrugs again. He seems to enjoy shrugging. Coincidences happen, he says, but he doesn't sound as though he believes it. Doggett looks over to a door at the side of the house. Tell you what, why don't you ask the owner? He's waiting for us in there. He moves off towards the door. I thought Gerald Cartwright was the owner, Tyler says, catching him up. Was being the operative word. His son just inherited the place when he turned 21, along with a small fortune. It's him what's doing the renovations. Congratulations, Sergeant, I found you your first suspect. The door into the house is stuck and Doggett's forced to take his shoulder to it. The wood groans stubbornly and then the rotting lino behind finally gives and the door flies open, pitching Doggett into the room. There's a man waiting patiently on a rickety kitchen chair. Doggett makes the introductions. Detective Sergeant Adam Tyler, this is Oscar Cartwright. The man with the blackberry laugh doesn't even blink. Detective Sergeant, he says. I shall leave it there and pass you back to Vic. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much for that, Russ. That was brilliant. So we can get Fire Watching now, is that right?
You can, yes, it's out in hardback and on ebook. Paperback to follow later in the year.
Excellent, thank you. And thank you so much for joining us tonight. That was great. And I'm glad your router held out. Okay.
I made it.
Yay! Thank you. Okay, folks, we're going to go to a break now and we will be back in 5 minutes.
Somewhere beyond the sea, somewhere watching for me, my lover stands on golden sands and watches the ships that go sailing. Somewhere beyond the sea, somewhere watching for me. If I could fly like birds on high, then straight to her arms I'll go sailing. It's far beyond the stars, it's near beyond the moon. I know beyond a doubt my heart will lead me there soon, and we'll meet beyond the shore, and we'll kiss just like before. Happy we'll be beyond the sea, and never again I'll go sailing. I know beyond a doubt my heart will lead me there soon, and we'll meet beyond the shore, and we'll kiss just like before, and happy we'll be beyond the sea, and never again I'll go sailing. No more sailing. No more sailing. No more sailing. So long, so long, so long. No more sailing. No more sailing. No more sailing. No more sailing. So long.
Thank you so much to Jason Isaacs, who is becoming a regular feature during our break times here at Virtual Noir at the Bar. I'm sorry, I've just been tagged in this ludicrous WhatsApp group with a few people you may recognise, Robert Parker, Robert Scragg and Danny Marshall. And we're just being very, very silly and I can't stop giggling. So don't mind me. Let's pull another name from the hat. You know when you get the giggles and you just can't stop? Ridiculous. It is Jessica Moor. Jessica Moor grew up in southwest London and studied English at Cambridge before completing a creative writing MA at Manchester University. Prior to this, she spent a year working in the violence against women and girls sector, and this experience inspired her first novel, Keeper. Jessica was selected as one of The Guardian's 10 best debut novelists of 2020 and is currently working on her next book. So all the way from Germany this evening, please welcome Jessica Moor.
Hiya, I'm going to read to you the second chapter of my book, Keeper. All you need to know about the first chapter is that a young woman called Katie goes to a bar and gets chatting to a guy. She's not sure how interested she is in talking to him, but that's what happens. And then the next chapter picks up a couple of years later and we meet Katie again under different circumstances. It was Whitworth's corpse, so to speak. The body had been found the previous day, washed up downstream of Widdringham. The location, the current, the lividity, all these suggested that the victim had come off the old bridge, which was on DS Daniel Whitworth's patch. It was a popular local spot for suicide. Whitworth had always expected that he'd get over the first bolt of shock on seeing a dead body, but so far he still hadn't. It was the way they so intimately resembled people, yet weren't. Whitworth had hoped to retire without having to deal with another corpse. Sod's law, too, that it was a girl. Older than his Jennifer, but not so much older that he didn't think of her primarily as someone's daughter. The smooth young skin was drained of colour, the eyes unframed by crow's feet. Death had no business on those faces. At least this girl, Katie Straw, hadn't been in the water too long. Her features weren't wrecked. It was bad enough that her boyfriend was going to have to identify her. He didn't need the shock of seeing that pretty face bloated into a pale monster. Whitworth noticed crumbs of something black around her eyes. The pathologist said it was eyeliner. His daughter's eyes had been dirtied with the same stuff that when she'd rolled them at him that morning. It had been the usual rows, getting into the car, exiting the car, in the car. Jennifer had justified herself in shrill tones over the tinny babble of the radio and drum of the rain, full of 16-year-old outrage. He'd watched her walk away, watched her wait until she thought he couldn't see her anymore, watched her angry stomp morph into a sort of waggle. Whitworth wondered if a man of almost 60 was just too old to be parenting a teenage girl. He had no energy for dealing with her, not now that all the sweetness seemed to have been sucked out of her, and this difficult demi-woman stood in her place. Maureen, his wife, was always on Jennifer's side, of course. But Whitworth didn't get to feel sorry for himself for too long. The movement of the door handle made him throw the sheet back over the body on the slab like a guilty secret. His trainee, Detective Constable Brooks, entered the mortuary room, followed by a tall, nauseous-looking young man with a scrappy, russet beard. There was a greasy sheen to his pale face. As he approached, Whitworth noticed the brackish smell of spirits. "Hello," he glanced at his sheaf of notes. "Noah?" The young man nodded. Normally, in a case like this, you'd look very carefully at the boyfriend. After all, if a woman was murdered, there was a 50-50 chance her bloke had done it. But Noah had apparently some sort of alibi, a stag do up in Glasgow. "I'm DS Whitworth," Whitworth said. "I'm afraid we have to ask you to identify the body. I think DC Brooks has already had a little chat with you about it." Whitworth kept his eyes on Noah, as if propping him upright with the solidity of his gaze. Ready? How could anyone be ready? But Whitworth had to say it. Noah nodded again, jerkily, like a marionette. Whitworth picked up the corner of the sheet between his thumb and forefinger and drew it back again, as carefully as he could. Noah stared down for a few long moments, then abruptly seized the covering and gracelessly yanked it back into place. "That's Katie," he said. Most people went pale when they saw a dead body, but Noah had gone bright red, as if embarrassed. Whitworth had a feeling he'd seen Noah about before, hovering around the edges of things. Pub fights, pissed up messes, silly bollocks involving traffic cones, always arse over tits drunk, of course. Probably not terribly bright, but not a bad kid. "Do you have a way of contacting Katie's family?" Whitworth was using his kind voice. The voice he always used on people whose futures were crashing down in front of them. Noah shook his head. "Katie's parents are dead. No other relatives." Then his shoulders started to shake. "She's all alone." It wasn't clear if he meant she'd been alone in life or that she was now alone in death. There was always that funny in-between period when folk didn't know if they were supposed to talk about the dead in the past tense. Either way, it made Whitworth breathe a sigh of relief. No need to tell a mother or father that their little girl was dead. Maybe by her own hand, maybe by someone else's. As a parent, he wasn't sure which would be worse to hear. Now Katie Straw could become a memory, a pile of paperwork. Noah's quiet sobs had turned into a kind of wailing. He didn't look like he was going to be much help to the investigation, not for now at least. It seemed to Whitworth that young men cried so much more easily these days. The door opened and Rachel, the pathologist, stuck her head in. She glared at Whitworth, then hurried forward to take Noah by the hand. Come on, love, let's get you a cup of tea. Noah allowed himself to be led away from Katie's body. As he left the room, he seemed to convulse slightly. Whitworth wondered if he was going to be sick. Brooks shut the door behind Noah, then strode forward towards the slab. He brushed the sheet back, studying the dead face. Always sad, sir. Suicide? Whitworth nodded. It was true. The body had all the hallmarks of a mundane, self-inflicted death, your standard issue female corpse. There was barely a mark on her, apart from the bold, professional post-mortem wound which slit her from collar to crotch. But her face had miraculously been spared. Lying on the slab, she looked like a painting, marble white and perfect. Virginal.
Thank you so much for that, Jessica. We've had a question from Alex Hawley for you. He says, congratulations on being selected for Theakston's New Blood, and he'd like to know what made you make Whitworth 60?
So you'll have to read the book to find out a bit more about Whitworth, but I would say that he is a guy caught between the modern world and its different attitudes and the world that he came of age in, and he is being expected to kind of shift his thinking at a time where he was maybe starting to check out a little bit.
Excellent, thank you, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's been great.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, on to our penultimate reader of the evening. I forgot to mention at the beginning of the evening, and here was me saying I was all organised, that we do have a competition for quote of the week. And so far we only have one quote in the running, which is Russ Thomas's "My mother's not pedaling hard enough in the basement." So at the moment Russ has won, but there is time for that to change. And hopefully, giving us another contender, it's going to be DC Smith. DC Smith was shortlisted for the 2019 CWA debut Dagger. Ooh. He was a finalist for the 2019 Capital Crime New Voices Award. Ooh. And a 2019 Pitch Perfect finalist at Bloody Scotland. Ooh. In addition to losing in those competitions, he also won a prize in an axe throwing contest, so be careful not to upset him. DC Smith is a contributing author to the Noir from the Bar anthology. Buy it. His words, not mine. I don't write the intros. DC is a former UK resident, but he's back in his native US, where he practices law at a firm whose London office building gained fame for creating a death ray that melted parked cars and started fires on a nearby street. You'll have to ask him about that. So everybody, please put your hands together for DC Smith.
Thanks, Vic. I will note that Vic actually did add one part to that intro that I didn't write, but you guys can figure that one out. Thanks for sticking around to listen. I note that it's a very good thing that Joe Lansdale was here earlier tonight. Otherwise, in 2 weeks, he would have gone in American Readers from Lawrence Block to me, which maybe not quite an upgrade. I'm sorry that Harrogate didn't happen in person this year. I was going to come, so some of you guys in the room, I was looking forward to seeing you in person, but hopefully next year. Seeing as we can't travel very much right now, I thought I'd bring you guys over to my side of the Atlantic. This is a dual timeline book, and you're going to get the opening of both timelines, which are the first 2 chapters. So this is called The Last Bird. By the way, this is still looking for a home. So if any of you guys know any agents or editors who might be into something like this, please let me know. Chapter 1, August 8th, 2019. The broken hulk of the SS Palo Alto rose abruptly out of the waves, a vertical wall, a vertical concrete wall, noted Emma Johannesson, catching her breaths. She left the frigid Pacific wash over her bare feet, feeling the coarse sand scour her soles. She had reached the halfway point of her run, a hard-fought 1.5 miles on sand, feet sinking slightly with each step. Morning fog dampened the sea's color to an indistinct green-brown while seabirds shrieked, their calls piercing the heavy mist. No other sound broke the rhythm of the waves. It had been 25 years since she had last seen this wreck, a quarter century that felt like a lifetime. When she had last set eyes on the Palo Alto, she'd been 12. Her father had driven them down from their home outside San Francisco on a rare day off, and they'd cast lines into the surf from the pier abutting the beached skeleton's stern. They hadn't caught much, but it hadn't mattered. A year later, Tryggve and Lotte Johannesson were dead, and Emma packed off to Stockholm and her grandparents. The ship remained. It faced 2 decades of winter storms until one finally tore its stern loose, ton after ton of century-old vessel tumbling onto its side. There it sat now, 90 degrees to the rest of the wreck, streaked with the shit of a million seabirds. Emma looked back at the beach, past the rotting mass of kelp, a wooden staircase slashed up the bluff, a single figure near its top. There had been 151 risers, if Emma recalled correctly. But unlike the ship, the staircase had been replaced since she had last visited. It was not the place her father had lost his first race to his fleet-footed daughter. Her watch read 6 minutes before 7. It had been scarcely a minute when the figure from the stairs appeared alongside her, wheezing. "I need a minute," said the petite woman between breaths, her pale complexion flushed. "That good, eh?" Tessa was the faster runner of the two, at least since Emma's accident had left her left knee with an ache that came and went and a cross-hatching of surgical stars that didn't. Tessa ignored the question. "Is the ship really concrete?" "Yeah." "Doesn't seem like the brightest idea." Emma shrugged. It wasn't. There wasn't a ton of choice. Not enough steel to go around. So they decided to build some oil tankers from concrete. Of course, they didn't finish them until the war was already over, and at that point, well, you see how it ended. No, I meant purely from an engineering standpoint. Several seagulls had settled nearby, pecking at something in the kelp. Concrete isn't exactly light. Says the woman whose job it is to fly 50 tons of aluminum 6 miles above the earth, said Emma. More like 43 tons, if I've done my conversion right. 44 or so for the Neo. The rest is fuel. And I would love to see a concrete A320. Light sea breeze had begun, bringing more seagulls to the kelp and more chill to Emma's exposed skin. She breathed deeply, salt air filling her lungs. Tessa bent over to retie her shoes. Emma had teased her about not going barefoot, but she couldn't blame her for keeping a manufactured sole between her own and dozens of wooden stairs. She straightened up abruptly, her red topknot snapping back into view. She said, "The seagulls?" Emma looked past her at the clod of birds in the kelp bed. There were now maybe 15, pecking away in a chaotic mass of wings and feathers. "Rats with wings," said Emma. The look she received in reply was one she had never seen on her partner. The wide eyes and tight jaw conveyed that the seagulls themselves were not the issue. "You're a cop," they said. "The problem is yours." Emma dispersed the shrieking avian frenzy with some arm waving and shrieking of her own. And there it sat, uncovered now on the kelp. A large hiking boot lying sideways, mid-rise, black sole, and an inch of pale ankle protruding onto the sand. Chapter 2, October 19th, 1974. The driver gripped the wheel, knuckles white, as the first snowflake fell from a matte gray sky. 3 minutes to go. The destination sat across a short expanse of grass, a brick chapel with its wooden doors open to the weather. His companion fixed her lipstick, nodding when done. The hinges groaned as the man stepped into the chill air. A photographer in an overcoat snapped well-dressed guests ascending a stone staircase in a torrent of white lapels, flared pants, and velvet. The photographer swapped out his film, blowing on his hands. It was a lucky break. They practiced the art of uninvited wedding attendance several times in recent weeks and had now perfected it. Arrive in the rush, look the part, sit on the groom's side, which might be appropriate here, God willing, but no receptions and no photos. They sat near the back, the man faking a productive cough. It worked. When the groom and best man appeared at the altar, the church had mostly filled, but the pew in front of the couple sat empty. The woman leaned in whispering. "Is it him?" she asked. He shrugged. At this distance, the tuxedo-clad man could be anyone. And 3 decades had blurred his memory. He had no photographs, nothing between memories of a 4-year-old boy in Poland and the present. It had been a cold morning, another leaden sky. He tried not to think of it, only lighting a single candle every October 31st. October 31st, 1943, the day they took Mariusz. And then a year ago, his wife had seen the engagement announcement in the New York Times. Mary Keenan, daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Walter E. Keenan of New Rochelle, engaged to be married to Professor Manfred Schmidt of Syracuse. She had brought him the announcement, pointing wordlessly at the happy couple's picture. "Is it him?" she had asked. His silence then spoke volumes. The groom's parents were described as Mr. and Mrs. Alois Schmidt of Santiago, Chile. Chile, German surname. The uncanny resemblance. Stan, she now whispered. The procession. Bridesmaids and groomsmen passed, 2 of each, followed by the maid of honor. Gray suits for the men, hunter green dresses for the ladies. They were close enough for Stan to smell. The women's clean scent paired with last night's scotch from the men. She looks beautiful, his wife said to him. Stan flicked a glance at the bride. Straight brown hair, pale face, wide smile. No crying, like Magdalena. Good. 2 officiants, he noticed, 1 Catholic and 1 Lutheran. No wonder they had chosen a university chapel for their wedding. Magdalena startled when the groom first spoke. He sounds like you, she said. Blue eyes, too. The ceremony proceeded rapidly, 1 reading by the groom's younger brother. Vows. 2 calm, steady voices, promising each other the same things uncountable couples had failed at and yet all continue to promise. The Lord's Prayer, their Chicago accents, hidden under muttered breath. And now the recessional, an upbeat organ piece. He had a long look at the couple as they walked back down the aisle, grinning and waving. Their matching blue eyes, her dark hair distracting from his receding blonde hairline. Stanislav touched a hand above his own forehead, the empty space where the sweat now gathered. The groom passed and met his eyes. Only time for 1 word. Krolik, Stan said. Rabbit. His family's nickname for the boy, stolen 3 decades earlier by the German soldiers. Rabbit, for his oversized ears and prominent front teeth. Rabbit. And as Manfred Schmidt stepped out of the aisle and into the dim daylight, he looked over his shoulder, directly at Stan. On Pamieta, Magdalena whispered. He remembers. That's it. Thanks. Back to you, Vic.
Thank you so much for that. David, Gavin Dimmock would like to know how the book is coming along, as he's very keen to read it.
Well, this one's kind of a weird one because this was originally designed to be the 2nd in a series. It goes with the one that was shortlisted for the debut Dagger last year. And when I started writing this, I had realized I thought this one might actually make more sense as a prequel. So it's coming along pretty well. I just had to change a few things. And of course, that held up submitting the other one anywhere. So it's a bit of balls in the air kind of thing, but we'll get there eventually, I hope.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And thank you for joining us. Well, it's this afternoon for you, isn't it?
It sure is.
Thank you very much. Okay, we have 1 name left in the hat, just in case you were wondering. It is Andrew Michael Hurley. And okay, so we had Joe Lansdale here earlier, who is one of Simon's favourite authors, and Andrew Michael Hurley is actually one of mine. He is the author of 3 novels, The Loney, signed copy here, which was published in 2015, won the Costa First Novel Award. Woo! Devil's Day, which was published in 2017, which is on my bookcase through the other room, which jointly won the Royal Society for Literature's Encore Award for Best Second Novel. And this year's, oh no, it was last year. I thought Starvacre was published this year, but my bad, it was 2019. What day is it? What year is it? Who knows? Starvacre was serialised on the BBC's Book at Bedtime. Andrew lives in Lancashire and teaches creative writing at Manchester Met University. So everybody, our final speaker of the evening, Andrew Michael Hurley.
Hi everyone, hope you can hear me okay. Thanks very much, Vic, and thank you very much for inviting me to speak tonight. It's been absolutely brilliant. I've enjoyed all the readings, absolutely fantastic. I'm going to read 2 short extracts from Starvacre, which is my 3rd book. I'll tell you a little bit about it to begin with. It's about a couple, Richard and Juliet Willoughby, whose young son Ewan dies at the age of 5. So it is a novel that does concern the death of a child, although the bits that I'm going to read I don't think are too traumatic. So I'm just going to read a little section from the beginning of the novel that just explains the sort of situation, but also the setting as well. The setting is one of the kind of sort of key things for me in my writing. And this novel is set in the Yorkshire Dales. Overnight, snow had fallen thickly again in Croftondale, and now in the morning the fells on the other side of the valley were pure white against the sky. Further down, where the sun had not yet reached, the wood by the beck was steeped in shadow and would stay cold all day. The freezing mist that was twined between the leafless beech and birch had already driven the hungry fox to seek food elsewhere. A line of deep paw prints came out of the gloom and into the pearly light that washed over the drifts on this side of the dale. Yet the animal seemed to have changed direction abruptly, startled into a hollow or a ditch by the folk out shooting nearby. Men from Micklebrow, probably, who'd walked over the moor to take advantage of the wide empty canvas on which the grouse and the pheasant were as bright as streaks of paint. The sound of shotguns and whistles doubled in the air that was uncannily still and expectant after the blizzard. The storm had lasted for hours, and the extent of its fury was marked by icy cornices blown over the dry stone walls. They were wild, jagged crests, like those of a sea surge breaking on inadequate defences. So the winter went on, adding to itself day by day, making the houses in the dale seem even more remote from one another than usual. None of the farmers had been out yet with a plough, and on the road by Starbaker, the snow cleared the evening before had frozen solid. All along the verges it was piled like crumbled pieces of cumulus. From his study, Richard Willoughby heard another volley of gunfire and watched the rooks burst from the ash trees outside the window. They scattered in a mess of wings and curses and flapped away to the field across the lane. For days now they'd gone out foraging in the frosted hummocks out of desperation and had found little or nothing in the way of sustenance. It seemed to Richard that February simply refused to leave the dale. He wished that it would, and soon. There was something about being able to say that it was March, something in the name that suggested energetic purpose and the onward movement of things. A time to work, a time to shoulder the yoke. There were lines of poetry about the early spring that he thought he should like to learn as reassurances that the world would turn green again. On a day like this, it was easy to have doubts. Everything was starving and puny. Everything was waiting, just as he was. The rooks spun in the sky, their calls cracking on the frozen air, and as he watched them, Richard felt a swelling sensation in his head, something akin to the start of a migraine. He blamed himself for getting distracted. When he was in the study, he was normally so attentive to his work. Devoid of family photographs, it was his oubliette. But Ewan could find him in the strangest of ways. The rooks reminded him of the paper birds he'd once made in the small hours when the boy had been frightened and restless, and how when the birds had been folded into shape, he'd told stories with them, and Ewan had eventually gone, his big eyes closing in much-needed sleep. Richard left the sentence he'd been mulling over half-typed, moved to the armchair next to the bookshelves, and switched on the radio. One of the Brandenburg concertos was in full flow. He put on his headphones and turned up the volume until the strings and horns were distorted, trying to lose himself in the noise and banish you into the dark hole from which he'd emerged. If he had to be absent, then why couldn't he remain so? A blank could be coped with, just as a man might become used to a missing hand or foot and improvise a way of living until it became habits, and habits a kind of normality. After the funeral at the end of the previous summer, Richard's tactic, just as it was now, had been to work as hard as he could, so that when the new academic year began, he turned Apian, darting from one thing to another, but giving each new task his full attention. Perhaps he'd been naive to expect people not to treat him any differently, but their insistence on doing so became frustrating, and his colleagues in history had quickly learned that if they approached him with a look of sympathy, he would avoid them. He'd never been pitied before. He found the attention unbearable. Can't stop, he'd say, or running late. And if they persisted anyway, walking with him across campus, then he ensured that the conversation turned to some work-related matter. Work was all he talked about. Work was all he did. Before lectures, he would ensconce himself in the depths of the library and return after he'd finished teaching for the day. He'd attend every meeting, even those that didn't directly concern him. He'd come in early to prep. He'd stay late for tutorials with his master's students. It was unsustainable. and he'd known that before long it would be noted, and then anxious discussions would be had, and the wheels would turn, and a smiling face would invite him into an office and nudge him towards a sabbatical he ought to have taken years before. It'll give you the opportunity to really concentrate on your research, Richard, and take whatever time you need. Just come back to us refreshed. Of course, he knew that they were thinking of themselves rather than him. Shunt him out now and they could avoid all the difficulties and embarrassments that would become manifest when the tidal wave of grief finally crashed on Dr. Willoughby, and he drowned in the middle of a lecture on Persepolis or the Scar. For several years now, Richard had initiated his undergraduates with a slideshow of photographs he'd taken on the research trips before Ewan had been born. He gave them no warning of what they were about to see. That was the point. Their reaction was the lesson. Here were the bones of St. Hyacinth in Fürstenfeld, St. Erasmus's astonished skull in Munich. Here was a crypt in Palermo and the dozens of mummified priests, each still dressed in his robes and beretta, each noseless face dry and mottled like the rind of a strong cheese. Look at the Catholic incorruptibles, he'd say, still sweetly perfumed and pliable after hundreds of years. Imelda Lambertini, Anna Maria Taigi, the beautiful Bernadette Subaru. He'd asked the class if they found themselves fascinated or repulsed as he sent around photographs of the Bolivian Yatitas, the decorated skulls and infant skeletons that shared houses with the living. Wasn't it more respectful to do this than consign the dear departed to a box or a bonfire, he'd say? Wouldn't one wish to have some physical presence after death? He played devil's advocate, but always privately sided with those students who could see the love that rested in his relics. And now, since Ewan had gone, he thought that there was a great decency in oblivion. There was no point in preserving the boy's belongings like the artifacts of a museum. Everything, every last toy and every piece of clothing ought to be thrown into the stream of time to float away. The murals on his walls ought to be whitewashed, and the windows cleaned, and the room filled with the noise of a new child. Not to forget Ewan, but only to acknowledge that he wasn't coming back. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Andrew. Catherine Magog would like to know if the location is based on a specific place in the Dales, a combination of places, or if it's completely fictitious.
It's it's based on a few different places really. It's sort of near Malham, if you know that area of the Yorkshire Dales. It's sort of based on a little bit of that. It's a little bit of Coverdale as well, where I've spent a bit of time. So yeah, it's kind of an amalgamation of a few places. I tend to take a few geographical liberties when I'm using setting in my novels.
Thank you. And Susie Aspley, who like me is a massive fan of your books, would like to know what your next book is and when it's out.
Well, I'm writing it at the moment. I think, as far as I know, it's going to be set up in the Solway Firth, so on the borderland sort of between England and Scotland. I've not really got very far with it at the moment. It's been kind of labour of love over the last few months during lockdown, but it's the last few weeks have been quite productive, so I've started to make some inroads into it. But I've been kind of interested in that kind of life of an estuary, the kind of particularly to the kind of flooding and erosion. So yeah, quite where that's going to take me, I don't know, but yeah, hopefully I'll make some inroads into that over the next few months.
Excellent, fingers crossed. Thank you very much. Okay, I have to do my awkward thing that I hate doing every week. If you do like what we do here at the Virtual Bar, Simon and I and the authors who appear don't make any money off it. It's part of the ethos of Noir at the Bar. Unfortunately, the people who provide our platforms do like to take some money. So if you feel so inclined, but there is no expectation on you to do this, please do donate via our Ko-Fi link there. I feel awkward asking you this every week, but it's done now. Thank you so much to everybody who has tuned in tonight. Thank you to all of our readers. Thank you to the wonderful Simon Buick, whose technological knowledge knows no bound, and his patience as well is just incredible for having to deal with Luddites like me. Thank you to the Hold Steady and Jason Isaacs for providing us with yet more excellent music. as always, information will be dropping into your inbox over the weekend with regard to who will be joining us next week for our 16th virtual Noir at the Bar. I think the winner of Quote of the Week, we don't have to have a Twitter vote this week because Russ Thomas has won with "My mother's not pedalling hard enough in the basement." So well done, Russ. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for tuning in, and we hope to see you here at the virtual bar again next Wednesday.